So I told you even in the last occasion why the series of session is named like this. To be frank, I'm influenced by the very famous philosopher Bertrand Russell, who has written a book on marriage and morals. And the book was an eye opener when I was a teenager, even now it is evincing a great level of interest in my minds. So that is the thing that made me to christen this particular series on the morals and marriage. As Alamirman has put it rightly, many are not in a position to understand what could be the scope and ambit of the topic of the day: annulment of void and voidable marriages. Strictly speaking, none of the acts in force in India uses the word annulment when it deals with the question of setting aside the marriage as no marriage at all. Strictly speaking, annulment is slightly different from the word nullity. English courts apply the term nullity to void as well as voidable marriages. So also Indian courts. While nullity is said to be a term applicable to void marriages, annulment is the term applicable to voidable marriages. But Indian laws and Indian courts don't make such a confusion, and they use the single word called nullity for both the form of the process to set aside the marriage. So we'll confine to the technical word of nullity to mean and include the process by which a marriage is sought to be set aside. My dear friends, please understand, setting aside a marriage by a decree of nullity or annulling a marriage is totally different from dissolving the marriage. Dissolution of marriage is commonly known as divorce, whereas setting aside the marriage is called declaring the marriage as null and void or nullity. They stand on a totally different footing, mutually destructive each other. While dissolution of marriage means and includes and presupposes a valid marriage, and only a valid marriage can be dissolved by a decree of divorce. Whereas in cases of annulment of marriage, or whereas in cases of a declaration that the marriage is null and void, what is called nullity, the marriage is not admitted. There is no valid marriage. Since it is not a valid marriage, we want to erase the very factum of marriage from the life and books of marriage register. That is called a degree of annulment or degree of nullity. So the first lesson of the matrimonial dispute is that the relief of dissolution of marriage or divorce is totally different from the relief of seeking the marriage as a null and void one or seeking it nullity and seeking it to be annulled. So it was from the English law, the concept of declaration of nullity of marriages emanated to its colonies, so also India. Indian Divorce Act 1869 and the Parsi Marriage and Divorce Act 1936. These two acts were influenced by the English law to begin with. But the English law was borrowed as it is by the Indian context. When the Hindu Marriage Act was enacted in the year 1955, and a little ago, when the Special Marriage Act was enacted in the year 1954. So the Special Marriage Act 1954 or the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 are the enactments that borrowed the English concept of declaration of nullity of marriage as it is without much changes. Let me just venture into the provision of the Hindu Marriage Act to make it quite easily understandable. We have to go to section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act before understanding under which circumstances a marriage can be set at naught. As you all know very well, section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act speaks of conditions of a valid Hindu marriage. Section 5 speaks of nearly 5 circumstances in which a Hindu marriage can be set aside, either voidable or void. If we just see the conditions, The conditions are five in number. The first being bigamy. Neither party has a spouse living at the time of marriage. The second is the issue of capacity to give a valid consent. It has got some subclasses. Third is the marriageable age. As you have seen last occasion, I told what is called auto rickshaw graph, marriageable age of 21 for boys and 18 for girls. That is the third condition. The bridegroom has completed the age of 21 years and the bride the age of 18 years at the time of marriage. The fourth one being the parties are not within the prohibited degrees of relationship. And the fifth is something very unique to Hindu law. It's called the parties are not subindas of each other. So these five conditions of Hindu Marriage Act, as envisaged under Section 5, makes a marriage valid or not. So please understand that what makes a Hindu marriage void and what makes a Hindu marriage voidable is all envisaged under Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act. Consequences of a marriage solemnized in violation of the conditions laid down in Section 5 of the Act are not one and the same under the Hindu Marriage Act. The import of Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act is totally different from that of Section 4 of the Special Marriage Act. Friends, please, comparison is inevitable between the Hindu Marriage Act and the Special Marriage Act because they are almost on the same or similar footing. When all the four conditions envisaged or any of the four conditions envisaged under Section 4 of the Special Marriage Act is infringed or violated or transgressed, the marriage is rendered void by operation of the provisions of the Special Marriage Act. But that is not the case with the Hindu Marriage Act. When you peruse Section 4 of the Special Marriage Act, besides having side by side Section 24 of the Special Marriage Act, we may understand the consequences of violation of the four conditions, all the four or any of the four conditions of a valid marriage under Section 4 of the Special Marriage Act. But only when the condition of prohibition of bigamy and marriage within the prohibited degrees of relationship or subindas is violated, a Hindu marriage becomes void under Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act. I would say, in a simpler term, that as I told you already, Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act has got five conditions of a valid marriage. They are given in Roman numbers. If conditions 1, 4, and 5 of the Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act is violated, anyone is violated, such a violation renders a Hindu marriage void. Void means void ab initio. The very factor of marriage is nullified. It is not a marriage at all. Whereas conditions number 2 and 3 of the valid marriage of the Hindu Marriage Act under Section 5, when they are violated, that renders the marriage voidable. So two consequences arise out of violation of any of the provisions of Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act, namely, if subclass 1, 4, and 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act appended to Section 5 is violated, then the marriage is rendered void ab initio. Per contra, if subsection 2 and 3 of Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act is violated, that makes the marriage voidable. Now, a distinction between a void marriage and voidable marriage is something very important to be now understood. Void marriage is declaring the marriage to be invalid, void ab initio, at the very inception itself. It is not a marriage at all. To say the law very perfectly, I would rather say that a person need not even get the marriage declared to be null and void if clauses 1, 4, and 5 of Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act is violated because nullity does not require a declaration at all. But we see declaration as a matter of abundant caution because we need a kind of proof in paper to show that the marriage is nullified. So, void marriages are marriages that are no marriage at all. The very factum of the marriage is erased from the life of a person and from the books of the office of the registrar if it is registered, whereas voidable marriages are voidable at the instance or option of the parties who stands what is called violated or who stands punished. For example, section 5 has got two clauses that makes the marriage voidable. I told you violation of subsection 2 and 3. Subsection 2 speaks of consent aspect of the marriage, and subsection 3 speaks of marriageable age of the parties. If any of the two are violated, the marriage is not rendered a nullity at the inception. Either party may file a petition before the court concerned and avoid the marriage by seeking a decree of a nullity that is called voidable. So a void marriage does not strictly require any declaration by a decree because it is not a marriage at all in the eyes of law. Whereas voidable marriage is a marriage which is liable to be declared null and void only when the option is so exercised by any of the parties by moving the appropriate court of law. Now, if we move to the Indian Divorce Act 1869, law governing the Christians, there are no grounds to seek a marriage voidable. Contrary to the Special Marriage Act and contrary to the provisions of the Hindu Marriage Act, the Divorce Act, Indian Divorce Act 1869, speaks of only void marriages. If any of the conditions enumerated in the Indian Christian Marriage Act or Divorce Act is infringed or violated or transgressed, the result is simple. The marriage is nullity, it is void ab initio, it is a void marriage. So a petition may be filed before the court concerned under section 19 of the Indian Divorce Act. If you go to the Muslim law does not make such a watertight compartment between a void and voidable marriage, whereas they have a different, unique system of a declaration or status of marriage. Under the Muslim law, it recognizes only void marriage and there is no concept of voidable marriage in Muslim law. The void marriages in Muslim law are known as Batil, B-A-T-A-L, marriage. Muslim law has a unique concept of irregular marriage called Fasid, F-A-S-A-D marriages. There is no thing called voidable marriage in the Muslim law. So we'll come to the distinction a little bit later in elaboration. So when we speak of void and voidable marriages, as I told you already, a void marriage is one that will be regarded having not even taken place. Having not even taken place. A void marriage is no marriage at all. If a marriage which does not exist from its inception, it is a void marriage. For example, a person marrying his own sister or mother, for example, such marriages are void ab initio, they are void, they do not require any declaration at all. Simply because such a marriage has taken place as per the ceremonies of a Hindu marriage or a Muslim marriage or a Christian marriage, such a void marriage can never be ratified. So there can be no marriage at all in such a case, since they lack the very capacity to marry. For example, prohibited degrees of relationship. Here also, Hindus and Muslims differ with each other. To be frank, marrying cousin, like mother's brother's daughter or father's sister's son, is something permissible in Hindu law. But strictly speaking, they come under the prohibited degrees of relationship. But as Section 5 itself says, if such a marriage has been in vogue as a matter of custom and usage, such is not a state of a void marriage, though Section 5, subclass 4 is violated. Similarly, for Muslim, marrying father's brother's daughter is not prohibited because their custom permits such a marriage. So here also custom comes into rescue. So for a valid marriage, no legal consequences would flow. For a void marriage, no legal consequences would flow. Otherwise, I would say no legal consequences could flow from a void marriage. A void marriage infers no status of legitimacy of children born out of a void marriage, and such children are illegitimate. There is an exception under Section 16 of the Hindu Succession Act. I'll come to it a little bit later. We have to see the scenario of such a situation before 1976, after 1976. Before 1976, the decree of nullity can be obtained by a spouse, even after the death of the other side, respondent. But the Amendment Act introduced in the year 1976 in all Matrimonial Laws Amendment Act 1976 has changed the provision and position by inserting the words that a petition for nullity of marriage can be presented by either party thereto against the other party. So that word is very important. So a petition can be filed by one of the parties to the marriage against the another party to the marriage during their lifetime. There can be no petition when the other side is not alive. As I said already, a void marriage cannot be ratified. So to appreciate the distinction between a void marriage and a voidable marriage under the Hindu Marriage Act, one has to necessarily go through Section 5 with all the 5 conditions of valid marriage, Section 11 and Section 12 of the Hindu Marriage Act. Section 11 of the Hindu Marriage Act speaks of void marriages. Section 12 of the Hindu Marriages Act speaks of voidable marriages. Both speaks of violation of any of the conditions of Section 5. At the risk of repetition, I say if conditions 1, 4 and 5 of Section 5 are violated, it is a void marriage and it can be set aside under Section 11 of the Hindu Marriage Act. If conditions 3 and 4 of Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act is violated, it is a voidable marriage and a petition can be filed under Section 12 of the Hindu Marriage Act. So, a voidable marriage. What are all the legal consequences of a voidable marriage? A voidable marriage is one that will be regarded by every court as a valid marriage, subsisting marriage, until a decree annulling it has been passed. So, a voidable marriage remains to be a valid marriage. A voidable marriage is deemed to be a subsisting valid marriage in the eyes of law, unless and until a competent court set aside the marriage, or unless and until a decree annulling the marriage has been passed by the competent court of law. So it is because it is voidable at the option of the parties. There is a judgment of the Supreme Court reported in 1991 JT, Judgment Today, Volume 11, page 278, Kusum Kumari versus Kusum, where this Supreme Court has enunciated the distinction between a void marriage and a voidable marriage. What is the fate of the voidable marriage unless and until it is set aside by a competent court? So a voidable marriage is a perfectly valid marriage so long as it was not challenged, so long as it was not avoided. It can be avoided only on the petition of one of the parties to the marriage under Section 12 of the Hindu Marriage Act. Locus standi, to challenge the factum of marriage, is only within the one of the spouses. It is not given to anybody else except one of the spouses. If any one of the parties fail to avoid the marriage, which is voidable under Section 12 of the Hindu Marriage Act, the marriage remains valid throughout. If a voidable marriage is not avoided or set aside, and if one of the parties dies before the annulment, nobody else can challenge the marriage after the death of one of the parties. That is the very important aspect of amendment in the year 1976. So, unlike a valid marriage governed by the provisions of the Hindu Marriage Act, Section 11 speaks of a voidable marriage, and Section 12 speaks of a void marriage. We have to see the consequences as per the grounds available under Section 5. A voidable marriage under Section 12 of the Hindu Marriage Act, as against Section 11 of the Act, confers status of husband and wife of the parties so long as it is not avoided, and all the legal consequences of a valid marriage would flow from a voidable marriage unless and until it is set aside. Now, the distinction becomes still more very important because a void marriage is void ab initio. It does not alter the status of the parties. It does not confer and does not give rise to mutual rights of obligations of parties. Being no marriage, the courts merely passes a decree declaring the marriage as void under Section 11 of the Hindu Marriage Act. Per contra, a voidable marriage is annulled only by a decree of the court when the parties approaches the court. Unlike a void marriage, a voidable marriage will remain valid, as I said, unless it is annulled. The important fact comes now. The parties to a void marriage go for a second marriage during the subsistence of the previously solemnized marriage. What is the fate of the marriage that is contracted for the second time is a $1 million question so often put forth. The parties to a void marriage may contract, may perform another marriage even without a decree of a court, because I said a void marriage is no marriage at all. Hence, neither party will be guilty of the committing the offense of bigamy if Section 5, subclause 1, 4, and 5 are violated, and even though when there is no decree sought for to set aside the marriage. Similarly, a wife of a void marriage cannot claim maintenance under any of the provisions of the Act from the husband, as she has no status of a wife, but a wife of a voidable marriage has got every right to claim maintenance under the provisions concerned. Now, let me just speak a little bit of the distinction between valid, void, and irregular marriages under the Muslim law. Muslim law does not recognize the distinction between void and voidable marriages, I told already. Muslim marriages are classified into three categories or three kinds. A valid marriage is called a sahib. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the word properly. I think Jawad may correct me at the end. Sahib means a valid marriage. Batil means a void marriage. And fasid means an irregular marriage. These are the three forms of marriage a Muslim law contemplates. The sect of Muslim law is slightly approaching the matter differently. Sahi or valid marriage is the one which is performed between the parties having capacity to marry and with all necessary formalities and ceremonies. All consequences of a valid marriage will flow from a sahib marriage. Void or batil marriage under the Muslim law is the one which is performed in violation of some perpetual impediments. Muslim law contemplates some impediments which may be either perpetual or permanent or temporary. Void or batil marriage is the one which is performed in violation of some of the perpetual impediments. It is a void ab initio marriage, and no legal consequences will flow. Thus, a marriage performed in violation of rules of consanguinity or rules of fosterage or rules of affinity under Muslim law is a valid marriage. No formal declaration is required to set aside the batil marriage. If any one party desires so, he or she may move the civil court for a suit for declaration, and such a suit for declaration would lie under the provisions of the Specific Relief Act, we all know. A Muslim marriage is irregular, a unique concept of Muslim law. It is called a facet marriage. When such a marriage is performed in violation of an impediment or prohibition, which is not permanent, which is not perpetual, but temporary or remedial. So I repeat, a Muslim marriage is irregular or facet when it is performed in violation of an impediment or prohibition, which is not perpetual or permanent, which is only temporary or remedial. A facet marriage is neither a valid marriage nor a void marriage. It is not a validable marriage either. It is a peculiar Muslim marriage concept. Such a marriage is not valid to begin with, but it can be validated by removing the impediment. So a facet marriage is not a valid marriage at the inception, but it is curable by removing the impediment or by remedying the prohibition. I would give an example. When a person marries his wife's sister, which is forbidden, or when a person, a Muslim marries a fifth wife, he can remove the impediment by removing the first wife in the former case, or by divorcing any of the four wives in the later case. I repeat, when a Muslim marries his wife's sister, or a fifth wife, he can remove the impediment by divorcing the first wife in the former case of marrying his wife's sister, or by divorcing any of the four wives in the later case. To be frank with you, though Muslim law permits a marriage of four wives simultaneously, in my life I have never found a Muslim having married at least two or three wives. So it is only on the paper the such a liberty is given, and it is not easy to marry for a second time unless the Jamaat gives you permission, which is very difficult and almost is rather near impossible. A facet marriage can be terminated by either party at any time, either before or after its consummation, by expressing an intention to nullify the marriage. Any words will be sufficient. There are no fixed words in case of, like a case of a talak. So the intention to nullify the marriage is clearly expressed, means that is the end of the termination of a facet marriage. But the Shia sect of the Muslim law does not recognize facet marriage as it is. For them, violation of any impediment, whether temporary or permanent, is only a battle marriage. Now let us move to an important consequence of a void and voidable marriage: children. Children born out of a void marriage or children born out of voidable marriage. What is the consequence of the legitimacy of such a children? Is $1 million question. The point that will be running in the mind, in the backdrop, is this: what sin the children have committed for the sin the parents have committed. Under the Divorce Act 1869, when a marriage is annulled on the ground of insanity, children begotten before the decree will be legitimate. Such a void marriage does not bastardize the child. But in case of bigamy and marriage contracted in good faith on insanity, when the Special Marriage Act and the Hindu Marriage Act were enacted, it is provided in the acts that upon annulment of the marriage, the children would become illegitimate. The Marriage Laws Amendment Act 1976 came as a rescue to such children, and the Amendment Act in the year 1976 has altered the position completely. Under both the acts, namely the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 and the Special Marriage Act 1954, the changes were introduced. I will take Section 16 of the Hindu Marriage Act and Section 26 of the Special Marriage Act as the important amendment in the year 1976. Because of the amendment, now the position of the children is totally different. Children born out of void and voidable marriages, whether declared or not, that makes no difference. Such children are legitimate under the amendment introduced in the year 1976. But we have to see the proviso appended to Section 16 of the Hindu Marriage Act and Section 26 of the Special Marriage Act. These provisions lay down that the children of a void marriage and the children of unannulled voidable marriage will inherit the property of their parents only and none else. So here lies a subtle distinction between the right of children born out of a void or a voidable marriage to claim a right of property from the parents and persons who are not their parents, for example, grandparents. So I would say in such a simple way that for a Hindu illegitimate children, Section 16 of the Hindu Succession Act is very clear that a child who is a Hindu and born out of a void or voidable marriage is not disentitled to claim a right over the property of the parents, but such a child cannot claim a right over the co-partner interest of the father, because an illegitimate child can never be a co-partner under Section 6 of the Hindu Succession Act and the uncodified Hindu law. Co-partnership contemplates a children born out of a valid wedlock only. So, a child born out of a void or voidable Hindu marriage can never claim right over the co-partnership or ancestral property of grandfather or even the father. But such a child born out of a void or voidable marriage has got every right to claim a right over the father's property, both under the Hindu Marriage Act and under the Special Marriage Act. They will inherit the property of the parents only and not anybody else. Children born out of void or voidable marriages are not co-partners, I told already under Section 6 of the Hindu Succession Act. So they cannot claim any interest in the co-partner property. There is a case law in AR 1984 Madras, page 270. AR 1984 Madras, page 270, Margabandhu versus Kodandarama Mandri. And there is one more case law in AR 1990 Madras, 90 Madras, page 110, Perumal Gounder versus Pachayappan. Margabandhu versus Kodandarama Mandri, AR 1984 Madras 270, and Perumal Gounder versus Pachayappan, AR 1990 Madras, page 110. These two case laws will give a better idea about the rights of children born out of a void or voidable marriage under the provisions of the Hindu Marriage Act. So I can summarize the present position of law as follows. Children of an unannulled voidable marriage are legitimate the same way as children of a valid marriage. I repeat, children of an unannulled voidable marriage are legitimate the same way as children of a valid marriage. Children of an annulled voidable marriage and void marriage, whether declared void or not, are legitimate, but they will inherit the property of their parents only and not anybody else. I may refer to one more case law, Rameshwari Devi versus State of Bihar, AR 2000 Supreme Court, page 735, equivalent to 2000 volume 2 SEC, page 431. I repeat, Rameshwari Devi versus State of Bihar, AR 2000 Supreme Court, page 735, and 2000 volume 2 SEC 431. In the said case, the Supreme Court has held that the children of void marriages are recognized for taking share in the family pension and gratuity without any formal decision of the court of law. That is under Section 16 of the Hindu Succession. There is one more case law of Supreme Court in the year 2010, AR 2010 Supreme Court 2685, Bharata Mata versus R. Vijaya Ranganathan, AR 2010 Supreme Court 2685, Bharata Mata versus R. Vijaya Ranganathan, where the Supreme Court held that children born out of live-in relationship cannot claim the benefit of Section 16 of the Hindu Succession Act because they take form of a different marriage. I hope there will be a change of law soon because a live-in relationship would give way for a presumption of valid marriage if there is a long and continued cohabitation between the spouse even without a proof of marriage. Let me now shift to grounds of void marriage. under the different personal laws. They are different under Indian personal laws. Broadly speaking, a marriage within prohibited degrees of relationship and bigamous marriages are void under almost all personal laws, whether Hindus or Muslims or Christians or Parsis are under the Special Marriage Act. Except Muslims, where bigamy is not a punishable one and where polygamy is recognized to a limited extent. Grounds of void marriage under the Hindu law are as follows. If at the time of marriage either party has a spouse living. Number two, if parties are subindas for each other. Number three, if the parties are within the prohibited degrees of relationship. Here, the question of customer usage comes an exception is there. If requisite ceremonies have not been performed under Section 7 of the Hindu Marriage Act, and if both parties are not Hindus, such a marriage of Hindus is a void marriage. Marriage between Hindu and other professing other religion is also null and void under the provisions of the Hindu Marriage Act. Section 2 and Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act speaks of the same. The expression may used in the opening words of Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act are held to be mandatory and not directory. I repeat, the expression or the word may used in the opening words of Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act is held to be mandatory or not directory. See AR 2009 Supreme Court, page 1085. AR 2009 Supreme Court 1085, Gullipilli Saurya versus Bandaru Bhavani. Gullipilli Saurya versus Bandaru Bhavani, AR 2009 Supreme Court, page 1085, where the Supreme Court has delved into the minutest ingredients of Section 2 and Section 5 and the meaning of the word may that is taking place in the beginning portion of Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act, or the opening words. Let me now go to Muslim law. Various requirements of capacity to marry or the grounds of nullity are available. Broadly speaking, a Muslim marriage is void under all schools if it is performed in violation of the condition of threefold: violation of consanguinity, violation of fosterage, and violation of affinity. So except this ground, there is no ground of declaring a marriage as void under the Muslim Marriage Act. As I already told you, it is only fasid in case of violation of any temporary or permanent impediments under the Muslim law, a sect of Muslim law. If we move to the Christian law, we will have to go to the Divorce Act 1869. A marriage under the Divorce Act 1869 is void under the following grounds. Number one, impotency of the respondent at the time of marriage. Number two, parties are within the prohibited degrees of relationship. Number three, either party was idiot or lunatic at the time of marriage. Number four, living spouse at the time of marriage. Number five, consent of the either party obtained by force or fraud. These are all the consequences Indian Divorce Act contemplates, and the marriage is void, and there is no voidable marriage under any of the provisions of the Indian Divorce Act. Let me move to the Special Marriage Act 1954. A marriage is both void and voidable depending upon the violation of Section 4 of the Special Marriage Act. A marriage is void on the following grounds of the Special Marriage Act. Number one, spouse living at the time of marriage. Number two, either party was incapable of giving a valid consent at the time of marriage. Number three, in consequence of unsoundness of mind or has been suffering from mental disorder, not to be fit enough to give consent or not to be fit enough to procreate children or not to be fit enough for marriage, or he has been subjected to recurrent attacks of insanity is a ground of declaring a void marriage under the Special Marriage Act. And again, the marriageable age of 21 for bridegroom and 18 for bride is available under the Special Marriage Act. The respondent remaining impotent at the time of marriage and also at the time of institution of the suit is also a ground of declaring a marriage null and void under the provisions of the Special Marriage Act. Now, Special Marriage Act also contemplates cancellation of a marriage registration under the following circumstances. Marriage was bigamous, either party was idiot or lunatic at the time of marriage, no valid ceremonies of marriage, parties were below the marriageable age, and parties are within the prohibited degrees of relationship. So now let us have a glance under section 494 of IPC, that is punishment for bigamy. The ingredients of punishment for bigamy under section 494 of IPC are as follows. Having a husband or wife living, A. Marries in any case, B. In which such marriage is void, C. By reason of its taking place, D. During the lifetime of the spouse. This has to be taken into account while we're dealing with the punishment of bigamy under the personal laws, excepting, of course, the Muslims. Now the question is whether a spouse can bring a suit for injunction restraining the other spouse, other party from performing a bigamous marriage. The suit under section 9 of CPC is strictly maintainable, read with section 38 of the Specific Relief Act. Non-age or falling below short of the marriageable age does not render the marriage void under the Hindu Marriage Act. A marriage is void under the Special Marriage Act under the non-age or marriageable age criteria. In such case, a suit can be filed to seek an injunction against performance of such a marriage under section 9 of the CPC. Let me move to the ground of insanity. Insanity must be a premarital condition. Both impotency and insanity under all the laws should be a condition that should have existed at the time of marriage and also at the time of presentation of petition. Premarital insanity or pre-marriage insanity is a ground for void marriages under the Special Marriage Act. Under the Hindu Marriage Act, it is a ground of a voidable marriage. Now, grounds of voidable marriages are totally different from grounds of void marriage, as I already told you. A ground is a ground of void marriage under one statute and is a ground of voidable marriage under another statute. There is no uniformity of statute or provision to declare a marriage void or voidable because of operation of personal laws. For example, impotency. Impotency is a ground of void marriage under the Divorce Act and ground of void marriage under the Special Marriage Act. But impotency is a ground of voidable marriage under the Hindu Marriage Act. Let us go to the ground of voidable marriage under the Hindu law. Grounds of voidable marriage under the Hindu law are failure of the respondent to consummate the marriage on account of impotency. It is an amendment that was brought into later because impotency is not a word which is emphasized under the Hindu Marriage Act. It is the failure of the respondent to consummate the marriage. The emphasis is more on the failure or inability to consummate the marriage than the word impotency. Please see, failure of the respondent to consummate the marriage on account of impotency is one of the grounds of voidable marriage under the provisions of the Hindu Marriage Act. Incapacity to give a valid consent on account of permanent ailment is a ground of a voidable marriage under the Hindu Marriage Act. Section 5, subclass 2 and 3 are the ingredients of the Hindu Marriage Act. Under the Special Marriage Act, a marriage is voidable on the following grounds. Non-consummation of the marriage on account of willful refusal. It is not on account of impotency under the Special Marriage Act. It is on account of willful refusal. A marriage under the Special Marriage Act can be declared to be a null and void as a voidable marriage if it is proved that there is an element of non-consummation on account of a willful refusal of the respondent. And of course, premarital pregnancy is a ground of declaration of a marriage is null and void as a voidable marriage under the provisions of the Special Marriage Act. Let me now move into the very complicated subject. We have got 10 more minutes. Impotency. Impotency has got different connotations in medical terms and a different connotation under legal terminology. Let us not confuse ourselves by borrowing the word impotency from the medical parlance to the legal parlance. A person is impotent if his physical or mental condition makes consummation of marriage a practical impossibility. This is what is called an impotency in the legal perspective. A person is said to be impotent if his physical or mental condition makes consummation of marriage a practical impossibility. Impotency may be physical or it may be mental. It is psychological also, as against a spouse in some cases. It may be, as I said, it may well be a ground arising qua a person, against a person, qua the other spouse. In other words, invincible and persistent repugnancy. The word is invincible and persistent repugnancy on the part of the respondent to the act of consummation amounts to impotency. Impotency should be incurable if it is to be made a ground of voidable marriage. If it is curable, it can never be a ground of a voidable marriage. A person who is capable of consummation of marriage after a successful surgical operation or an effective medical treatment can never be called to be an impotent. Impotency literally means inability to perform a sexual act. I would use a medical word. If you are able to go through the Google, you may understand Vera Capula, VERACAPULA. This is the ingredient of the act called the deficiency called impotency. It speaks of the real import of the meaning impotency. Please search in the net. The yardstick is different from the terminology used in adultery and rape. The word potency in adultery and rape cannot be borrowed when it comes to the question of avoiding a marriage under the ground of impotency. What about impotency? Is it attributable only to men or is it attributable to female also? A female can also be impotent in some circumstances. We call it as barrenness or sterility. Whether barrenness or sterility amounts to impotency is the next question that looms large in the mind of persons concerned. The clause, as worded in all the matrimonial statutes in India and as has been interpreted by the courts across the country and also in abroad, does not lay down that fertility is part of potency. There is a famous English case law. If you are able to read, you will understand it is perfectly. It is an English case law between Yes versus Yes, reported in 1962, All England Reporter, page 33. Yes versus Yes, 1962, All England Reporter, page 33. In case of your wife who never menstruated, who had no uterus, could not consume the marriage, it was held by the English court that the wife was not impotent as she can be cured medically. The famous treatise on Hindu law by Raghavacharya has got a set of pages on this ground of impotency, fertility, and barrenness. I'll just extract, verbatim reproduce the words of Raghavacharya's Hindu law. Barrenness and sterility by themselves cannot and do not prove impotency. However, had been the period of such defect. Inability to beget and bear a children is not a ground for dissolving the marriage. If it is not proved that there was no power of complete copulation, barrenness is said in no sense to be synonym of impotency, and even the removal of the genital organ cannot be said to be render the wife incapable of entering into the marriage. Incapacity to give birth is not impotency. Raghavacharya Sindula says, incapacity to give birth is not impotency. I would like to recommend a case law to be gone into. AR 1971, Madhya Pradesh, page 168. Shavanti versus Barua. SHEWNTHI versus Barua. AR 1971, Madhya Pradesh, 168. It's a beautiful case on barrenness, sterility, infertility, and impotency. It's a case of your wife suffering from sterility and amenorrhea. Amenorrhea means no menstruation at all. Medical evidence in the said case proved that the defects could not be cured. She was found to be a woman not to be cured at all medically, but it was established that she was capable of having sexual intercourse, though not of bearing children. Justice Singh, delivering the judgment in the said case of Shevanti, held as follows. By the use of the word impotence, the legislature did not intend to bring in an idea of sterility or incapacity of consumption. Impotency here signifies incapacity to consummate the marriage. In other words, incapacity to have normal sexual intercourse. It is possible that a person may be sterile, still he or she may be capable of conjugal intercourse. So, the amendment of the year 1976 upheld the view failure to consummate the marriage by the respondent on account of his impotency only has been made a ground of annulment of marriage as voidable and not as a void marriage. For example, I want to reiterate one thing very clearly. Under any other personal law, whether it is Christians or Hindus or Special Marriage Act, impotency and insanity should be a condition that should have persisted at the time of marriage and should have continued and should have persisted at the time of institution of the petition. Post litigation impotency or post marital impotency can never be a ground of avoidable marriage. Now, the question is, can an impotent spouse sue for annulment of marriage? For example, A is the husband, B is the wife. We have heard cases filed by B that A is husband, A is impotent, so I want to get the marriage dissolved. The question is whether the husband A himself can file a petition to declare the marriage as null and void. There is only one enactment in India, that is the Parsi Marriage and Divorce Act, where a person who is impotent by himself can declare the marriage to be null and void, but any other enactment does not permit such a provision. And before concluding the session, let me go to the very important aspect of burden of proof and medical evidence of impotency, because till 2014, Indian courts were reluctant to accept medical evidence as a contra evidence, both for impotency and under Section 114 of the Indian Evidence Act. He who asserts must prove. That is the basic concept of burden of proof. It is not enough to show that the respondent has no interest in marriage. The petitioner who alleges that there is an impotency must prove that the respondent is impotent, or he or she has not been able to consummate the marriage on account of her or his impotency. Whether Article 21 can be invoked to resist an application to compel a person to undergo a medical examination is an interesting proposition of law. Article 21 may be gone into for once. Article 21 says personal right and liberty cannot be taken away, but there is an exception. That exception says it can be taken away if a procedure in accordance with law is followed. So, when a wife wants to file a petition to make the husband to undergo a medical examination so as to prove to the court that the husband is impotent, if the husband says this, no, my personal liberty, my right of privacy is infringed, the court says no, because what is sought to be done by the wife is only in the nature of discharging the burden of proof on her part. So, asking a person to undergo a medical examination, whether it is a DNA test or a potency test, it is only an exercise of discharging the burden of proof under the provisions of the Indian Evidence Act, a statutory exercise. So, it comes under the exception of a provision or a procedure followed in accordance with law. So, the Supreme Court has held in two important cases. In Nandlal Vasudev Baitvik, 2014, 5 CTC, page 680. Nandlal Vasudev Baitvik versus Lata Nandlal, 2014, 5 CTC, Supreme Court 680. And Deepan Vita Rai versus Rono Bato Rai, 2014, 6 CTC, Supreme Court 791, both in the same year. Nandlal Vasudev Baitvik versus Lata Nandlal, 2014, 5 CTC, page 680, and Deepan Vita Rai versus Rono Brato Rai, 2014, 6 CTC, page 791, Supreme Court. In both the cases, the Supreme Court has held that undergoing a medical examination at the instance of other parties can never amount to violation of Article 21, and the court has got every power to permit such a provision to be adopted. So, with this, I would just want to cite three or more case laws which you can go through leisurely, and I will circulate later. That may make the session a little bit interactive. 2018 6 CTC, page 831. Ranjit Priya versus Sushila, where section 16 of the Hindu Marriage Act and the right of the children born out of void and voidable marriage to claim right over the property of the father has been discussed. 2018 6 CTC, page 831, Ranjit Priya versus Sushila. Then 2019 2 current writ cases 614. 2019 2 current writ cases 614. Om Kumar versus DRO and G. Srinivasan versus M. Swaminathan, 2019 3 Law Weekly 890. These three case laws are going in the nature of discussing the right of illegitimate children under the provisions of the Hindu Succession Act. There is one more case law of the Supreme Court, 2019 1 CTC, page 695, Supreme Court. 2019 1 CTC, page 695, Supreme Court, Union of India versus Tirupati, and AR 2019 Supreme Court 666, AR 2019 Supreme Court 666 for interpretation of section 19. Before closing, I just want to cite one case law under the Muslim law which deals of batil marriage, fasid marriage, and the effect of the batil marriage on the legitimacy of children. 2019 volume 1 TNCJ, Tamil Nadu Civil Judgments, page 1017, Supreme Court. 2019 volume 1 TNCJ 1017, Supreme Court, Muhammad Salim versus Samsudin. In this case law, the Supreme Court has drawn a distinction between a batil marriage, a fasid marriage, and the legitimacy of children born out of such marriages. Then finally, when we go to the Indian Divorce Act, I want to cite one judgment, 2018 3 Law Weekly, page 104. 2018 3 Law Weekly, page 104, Division Bench, because it comes under the Family Courts Act, Rita versus Prem Kumar, where the Division Bench of Madras High Court has gone into the details of impotency on the part of any of the spouse, how to be proved. It should have been persisted at the time of marriage, and it should have been persisted even at the time of institution of the petition. When it is not the case, such a ground cannot be taken out. And finally, any marriage solemnized after the commencement of the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 shall be declared null and void if it contravenes any of the conditions of section 1, 4, and 5 of the section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act, 2018 5 CTC, page 99, Supreme Court. 2018 5 CTC, page 99, Supreme Court, Anurag Mittal versus Shayali Mishra Mittal, 2018 5 CTC, page 99, Supreme Court. Then finally, what about the child marriages? I already discussed in the last occasion, 2006, the marriage of children have been subjected to a change by introducing a new act in the place of Child Marriage Restraint Act. Section 12(1)(c) and Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act is spoken of by the Supreme Court. In 2017, Volume 2, Tamil Nadu Civil Judgments, page 141, Supreme Court. 2017, Volume 2, Tamil Nadu Civil Judgments, page 141, Supreme Court, Bhavati alias Reena versus Anil Dupe, where the Supreme Court held that child marriages are voidable at the option of the minor spouse only. Here, when the marriage took place, the girl was a minor, the boy was a major. The boy filed a petition for a declaration that the marriage is null and void, but the Supreme Court said no, such a plea can be taken only by a person who was a minor at the time of marriage, not a person who was a major. So this is the scope and ambit of the second series of Marriage and Morals, where I think I'm able to little bit elaborate on the various aspects of void and voidable marriage under various personal laws. And with this, I say namaste. Thank you very much, Adi ma'am.